So, which one is harder to learn, Italian or Spanish? Let's find out. Hello noble ones and welcome to Metatron's Academy, the channel where we explore how to learn languages in the most fun and effective way possible. And perhaps as you're trying to pick up a language that you want to learn, say either Italian or Spanish, the question, yeah okay, but which one is harder, might be in your mind. Now on this video we're going to tackle which of these languages is objectively harder. With that being said, it's important to also keep in mind, as I mentioned many times on previous videos, so today I'll just brush through it, difficulty in language learning is not only objective, but it is also subjective. In the sense that there are a few factors that will influence the overall difficulty of a language, say what language you speak as a first and your overall experience in language learning. In other words, if you're a native speaker of Italian, it's going to be rather simple for you to pick Spanish up, whereas if you're a native Anglophone speaker, it's going to be a bit harder, and if you are a native Mandarin speaker, it's going to be monumentally harder in comparison. But with that out of the way, are there some objective aspects of Italian and Spanish that we can use to say, yeah, this is definitely harder than that one? And absolutely there are, we're going to explore them here. But to give you a direct answer, Italian is harder than Spanish, but not by a long shot, differently from what some people say in several forums. In fact, one of the things we'll do today is we're going to read through two articles that are literally, in my opinion, well actually scratch that, they are absolutely misinforming people when it comes to this topic. In general, we are trying to assess a language difficulty. We're looking at the lexicon, vocabulary, grammar rules, pronunciation rules, writing systems. Then we compare these between languages, and usually linguists come up with a certain number of hours that you need to reach fluency in said language. Now, of course, these are very indicative. It's not a precise science when it comes to the amount of hours you need, because again, it's a case-by-case scenario. So Italian is harder than Spanish, and it's also used by less people worldwide, which means that if you are trying to select a language based on how much usefulness and comparatively how easily you can pick it up, you should go for Spanish. No questions asked. With that being said, if you're just passionate about Italian, you like Italy, you have got Italian friends, you've got Italian family members or an Italian wife or husband, if you are just drawn to Italy and you don't necessarily need to use it for work, but you're just doing it for pleasure, forget about all these statistics, pick Italian if that's the one you want, regardless of whether it's harder or not. But what we're going to do now, we're going to look at a couple of articles because I think there is some misinformation out there. So let's see if I can correct that in order to give you a more realistic expectation. Spanish versus Italian, core similarities and differences by discoverdiscomfort.com. And this was updated on the 15th of July 2023. I think we might need a couple more updates. Spanish and Italian are two well-known European languages with a lot of similarities between them, absolutely. So I'm gonna skip through the things that don't really matter, like what she's saying, Spanish and Italian are similar, okay, we get that. Let's get to a point where I start to disagree. Here we are. Both Spanish and Italian are derived from Vulgar Latin. Okay, let's see if I can get through this one quickly. There is no such thing as Vulgar Latin. Let me put it this way. Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, all of the Romance languages, they all derive from Latin. Full stop. They don't derive from Vulgar Latin. There is no such thing as Vulgar Latin. There is only Latin. You see, there is this myth that is still pushed out there, whereby in ancient Rome, in the classical period, you had two completely different languages. You had classical Latin, which was spoken by the upper echelons of society, the elite, and then there was Vulgar Latin, which was spoken by the vulgus, so the people. And they were completely different languages, and classical Latin just died out because nobody actually spoke it, and then Vulgar Latin, which was the way people spoke, that's what developed into European modern Romance languages. And that's absolutely false. One thing that we see in the majority of human communicative systems is the fact that any language has different registers. You can speak very formally, high register, you can speak a middle register, or you can speak in low register, very informally. What Vulgar Latin is just the informal low register used by people in Latin, including those who were very educated and spoke classical Latin. For instance, let's say you're going to talk to your boss, or you're talking to a professor at university. You're going to speak at a higher register than you would if you're speaking to your mates at a pub while you're watching a football match, Man United versus Arsenal. That doesn't mean that you're speaking two separate languages. You're speaking English regardless. Then the article goes into speaking about how there can be a certain level of mutual intelligibility between Italian and Spanish, which is absolutely true. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It kind of depends, it's a case-by-case scenario, but then they say this. But for mutual intelligibility between Spanish and Italian, it requires one person to speak slowly and the other to listen patiently. That's actually false. From a native perspective, every time that I've had a situation, which I had several times in my life, where I speak to a person from Spain or from Mexico, and he's using Spanish and I'm speaking back in Italian to try and find, common ground to be able to communicate. It doesn't matter how fast they speak. If I know the word, I'll recognize it. If I don't know the word, I won't recognize it. That's my personal experience. Now, if they were specifically talking about, yeah, but if you know a little Italian, then you'd require the Spanish speaker to speak slowly to be able to recognize the words, absolutely. But then again, you would need also an Italian speaker to speak slowly to you because you're not fluent enough to be able to understand and recognize words at full speed. So, I disagree with this one. If they have to speak slowly in order for the languages to be mutually intelligible, no, if I don't know the word, I just won't recognize it, even if they say super slowly. Conversely, if they say the word comprender, which sounds a lot like comprendere, they can say it as fast as they want, I'll recognize it. So here they're talking about language gender cases, and sometimes in Spanish something can be masculine and then in Italian it's going to be feminine and vice versa. That's absolutely true, but here is the example, and that's the problem. But televisión and televisore, television, don't act surprised, despite having a similar root, are feminine and masculine in Spanish and Italian respectively. No. Okay, so televisión in Spanish I imagine is feminine, but in Italian we have two words for it. Il televisore, which is masculine, the one they're mentioning, and la televisione, which is feminine. La televisione is the one word that the majority of Italians use. Yes, I've heard my dad a couple of times saying il televisore, so I can't say that that word, the masculine form, doesn't exist, but throughout my entire life, I've heard 9 times out of 10 the word la televisione that I've heard il televisore. So, putting it as if we only have il televisore and in Italian television is masculine and in Spanish is feminine is not true. At all. You can absolutely live 50 years in Italy and never use il televisore masculine and always call it la televisione. No one is going to think anything of it, and that's, for example, how I speak. I do not say il televisore. Again, my dad does. Personal choice. You might have someone in the comments saying, oh yeah, I tend to use it masculine, I say il televisore, good for you, but a lot of people say la televisione, me included, that's feminine, and in that case, no difference whatsoever. Alright, now we are on a different website, still talking about the differences between Italian and Spanish, but specifically focused on which one is harder, which was pretty much the topic of this video, and the website is called a siteaboutnothing.net. It's a big post with a lot of information, and I'd say if you're interested in this topic, absolutely come and check it out, but there are a few things that are factually incorrect, so I just want to let you know about these before you dive into reading this. So on this website they're making the case that Italian is a lot harder than Spanish. Once again, I slightly disagree. I do think Italian is harder than Spanish, but I don't think Italian is way, like by a long shot, harder than Spanish, because really then Japanese or Chinese are harder than Spanish by a long shot. Italian expands, adding vowels just because it sounds good. Very, very professional of you. The point is the reverse of the previous. At times, spoken Italian adds vowels to words to make them sound better. Check the examples. In Svizzera, in Svizzera. Per sbaglio, per sbaglio. No one says that. Like, absolutely not. Just no. I don't know where they got this one from. No one says per sbaglio. Per sbaglio? It's... Let me say them very close to the microphone, so... Alright. I'll say it slow, then I'll say it fast. In Svizzera. 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 Just like English, in Switzerland. In Switzerland. In Switzerland. In Switzerland. In Switzerland. In Svizzera. In Switzerland. In Svizzera. In... Per sbaglio. Per sbaglio, 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 per sbaglio. Per sbaglio, not per sbaglio. Absolute, I don't know where they got this one from, absolutely not. Per sbaglio. Italian capitalizes the inhabitants of a country. If you are like me, you probably prefer it the Italian way, closer to English. And then they say, in Spanish, Los italianos trabajan para el progreso humano. And then in Italian, gli italiani capital lavorano per il progresso umano. Honestly, I don't know if they changed this one, I doubt it. But in Italian, you only capitalize the first letter of ancient people, like the Etruscans or the Romans. Modern Italiani, Francesi, Spagnoli, I would write it lowercase. I've also heard that in Italian, even in the middle of a word, there can be some doubt as to how to pronounce the single letter Z and S. But I'm waiting for someone to give me a good example. Yeah, I'll give you a good example, absolutely. So sometimes when the S is in intervocalic position, so if it's in between two vowels, some Italian speakers will still keep it as an alveolar fricative sibilant, so S, like in sun, for example, filosofia, casa, cosa, naso, riso. And then some Italians instead will transform it into its vocalized form. And so it becomes naso, casa, filosofia, cosa, chiesa. That just depends on where the person is from, what region, what area of Italy. And when it comes to standard, then sometimes it's a Z and sometimes it's a S. So if you really want to speak standard, that's the one that's going to be a little harder because you need to just learn it case by case. There are some rules, however. I could make a dedicated video, but in general, in the south tends to stay S and in the north tends to turn into a Z more often. When it comes to the Z, similar situation. It's region-based. It's what makes accents together with intonation and other aspects of pronunciation. In the sense that some people say zio, some people say zio, zappa, zappa, zucchero, zucchero, alzati, alzati, etc. It's an accent. Standard has its own rules which are connected to Latin. Pranzo in standard has a z because it's connected to prandium, and in Latin there was a d. If in Latin there was a d, in standard Italian it becomes a z sound. Lazio has a ts sound because it's connected to latium, latium in ecclesiastical or medieval Latin, and so if there is a t in Latin, it becomes a ts in Italian. That's how it works. Tuscany and Rome are the only ones that tend to follow these rules, probably Tuscany even more than Rome, but in general, they are the most connected one when it comes to pronunciation of the Z. Not connection as a whole, because then Sardinian is the closer to Latin, but connection when it comes to the pronunciation of the Z, those regions are the most conservative when it comes to Latin, but then every region pronounces it however the heck they want, so it's a matter of accent. Use of the article in front of famous people's names. Unlike Spanish, Italian often uses the article in front of the names of certain famous people, il Machiavelli, il Pirandello, la Garbo, l'Ariosto, but only with famous people from the past. And not all of them. Paganini, Verdi, Rossini. Yes, but now they are making it sound weird. Like, they only do it with famous people, but they need to be from the past, and they don't do it to everyone because they don't do it with Verdi, Giuseppe Verdi, but they do it with Pirandello. But there is a reason. And the reason is, the reason why you say il Pirandello, but you don't really say il Verdi, is because you're really saying il poeta Pirandello. So when you do use the article in front of a famous person's name, is because you're basically summoning and then omitting their profession as a writer. You could be like them, why don't you say il musicista Verdi? We don't really do it with musicians, but we do it with poets. So that there is a distinction, and it's something that you can learn. And also I just remembered as I was editing, so I wanted to add this, that we don't only do it with famous people. For example, when I was in middle school, we used to do it with the names of the professor. So, for example, the teacher's name is Simoncini. We would say, la Simoncini, è arrivata la Simoncini, which means la professoressa Simoncini, but you just omit professoressa to make it faster. So there's that. Anyways, all in all, is Italian harder than Spanish? Yes. But is it so much harder that even if you really like Italian, you like Italy, your friends speak Italian, you want to go to Italy, spend a year there, but these websites are telling you it's harder by a long shot, so you should just give up on it and learn Spanish? No. It's not a situation like, again, the difference in difficulty between how to read and write in Mandarin or Japanese versus how to read and write in Italian or Spanish. Italian is a bit harder. The way we use plural is harder. We have more articles. We have the apostrophe, our accent, and specifically where the accent falls or the stress falls in a sentence is less logical in the sense that it follows less rules and it's more mnemonic. Yes, there are some differences when it comes to that. These core differences do make Italian objectively harder than Spanish. These differences in difficulty, in my opinion, are not enough to justify, well, then I'll just give up on Italian and do Spanish because it's significantly easier. It's not significantly easier. You'll still have to put in a lot of work for Spanish too. My suggestion would be, do not use this parameter, which one is harder, to choose whether you want to learn Italian or Spanish. Just use the purpose of you learning it. Are you learning it for work? Do you want to be able to speak to as many people as possible? Then yeah, pick Spanish up. Are you learning it for personal interest? Then it doesn't really matter which one is harder, because the difference in difficulty is not as big as it would be with something like Arabic or Mandarin or Cantonese. But if you have any other questions, feel free to let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you for joining Metatrons Academy.